My sister got me these earrings and they're made with raccoon toes. Bones. The bones. Hello, it's Echo. Welcome to my glorious art channel. I'm a little behind schedule, so I wanted to go ahead and make a quick video just talking about the worst teacher I have ever had in my entire life and that whole experience. It's also the only class that I have ever, actively cheated in. I am not the kind of person to cheat, ever. I have a pretty strong sense of justice. Sometimes when things are unfair, it feels like it's physically hurting me, but he's dead, so it's okay now. Also, I want to show you a drawing that I was working on because this is still an art channel, so I want to incorporate art to at least some degree. So this is going to be kind of like one of those temple run story time TikToks. I've been trying to reconnect with my high school self a little bit, both artistically but also in hobbies. And because I was thinking about high school, I could not help but think about this one teacher that I had. He was ancient, even when I was in high school. He was our Spanish teacher. I grew up in a Spanish-speaking household, so you would think that this would be a class that would be relatively easy for me, but I had a lot of issues with Spanish. Because I grew up in a Spanish household in a predominantly white Mormon town, I very quickly learned that Spanish wasn't the normal language, and so I pushed it out of my vocabulary kind of actively, which is something that I regret to this day, and which I now realize was just kind of an internalized oppression that I was applying to myself. I saw how people felt about Hispanic and Mexican people, and so I ended up taking on some of those beliefs when I was very young and trying very hard not to be Hispanic. I felt the pressure to assimilate. My hometown was predominantly white Mormon, maybe a quarter Navajo Nation and a quarter Hispanic. Roughly, at least that's how I interpreted it when I was in high school. That being said, I thought it was very strange that our high school Spanish teacher was a member of the Mormon church who had a lot of power in my hometown and learned Spanish as a second language when he went to Guatemala. That never fully sat right with me just because we had native Spanish-speaking people in our town who were qualified, but if I had to guess, that was just never a job opportunity that was presented to them. That being said, this man was very underqualified. This man was very old, and one of his favorite things to do was to tell stories. So because this man learned Spanish as a second language, a lot of the grammatical rules, the words that he learned were connected to specific memories from his trip to Guatemala, which by the way he went for during his Mormon mission. If you don't know anything about Mormons, you know the stereotype of the young Mormon man with the white shirt and the black tie? Those are missionaries. Those are young men going on their Mormon mission. And his Mormon mission is where he learned Spanish. And my guess is that because this man has been teaching Spanish at this high school for a very long time, originally it started as just small anecdotes, little stories to help people remember. So for example, he would always bring up that there was someone in his neighborhood who would go around yelling pan to sell their bread, and that's how he remembers the word for bread. But over the years, it devolved into completely unrelated moments from his life that had nothing to do with Spanish. And lots of the students knew this and did not care to learn Spanish. So it was very easy to get this man going off on a completely random tangent and just stop teaching for the day. He would just fully state his controversial opinions. This next part is definitely going to need a bit of a trigger warning, so if you are very sensitive to animal death or gore, then maybe just skip to this time frame or just hit forward a couple times to jump 30 seconds to a minute ahead in this video. But there is one story that is specifically burned into my brain that he once told us about when he went to go and start his car and then he heard this horrible noise, and when he got out of the car he saw the back end of a cat that had been mangled in half, and that he followed a trail of blood and organs and found the front end of the cat trying to claw away. This is a story that he told to a room full of teenagers. That was our Spanish lesson for the day. There's another story that he told that was particularly damaging now that I think about it looking back, where he had talked about being in this other country and seeing a beautiful woman at a pool and then seeing her sit down in the beach chair and put her arms up and having armpit hair, and that it was the most disgusting thing he had ever seen. Basically shaming this woman for having body hair, again, to a room full of high schoolers. I didn't shave my armpits when I was in high school. I was there to learn. I did not care about my appearance. And as you can imagine, all of the girls in this class were hearing this old man talking about how disgusting it is when beautiful women have body hair. The self-esteem issues some of these girls had to have walked away from this class with is disgusting. Not to mention the fact that he is modeling that behavior for a room full of teenage boys. To think that it's okay to call someone disgusting for having body hair. It got to the point where I started keeping track on a notebook page all of the times that he went off on a completely unrelated tangent that has nothing to do with the subject that he's supposed to be teaching, or when he started stating political opinions or controversial subjects, things that were more adult-oriented that I knew a room full of teenagers should not be subjected to. Even if I didn't have opinions formed around those ideas, I knew he wasn't supposed to be talking to us about that, especially in a Spanish class. At one point in academic decathlon, I started talking to one of the English teachers about this Spanish teacher, and I showed them my notebook, and I showed them step by step all of the things that he was talking about in his Spanish class. And she was flabbergasted. She was completely shocked. She was stunned that this was happening and that no one had said anything. Now again, have in mind, I didn't want to learn Spanish, but I knew what he was doing was wrong. And there were other students who also just didn't want to learn. They did not care because the class was easy. The next day when I went, he was so visibly angry that he had to do his job. And he stood up in front of the class and actually taught Spanish. I immediately knew that she said something. I could tell, because he was so angry about it. And the students would try and poke at him to try and get him to go off on tangents, and he would have to resist and keep teaching Spanish. Unfortunately, this only lasted for about a week before again he broke down and started doing the same old bullshit he always does. So I'm sure you're wondering, like, if he just stood up in front of the class and talked about random moments from his past and political opinions and controversial subjects he shouldn't be bringing up, how did anyone pass this class? He gave us the answers to all of his tests. Basically, what he would do is that he would take the test and then scramble the answers, and then we as a class would review it the day before the test. He would give us printouts of the test we were going to take the next day. The only thing that you learned in this class was how to cheat, because that was the only way that you could pass it. You either had to know Spanish already or you had to cheat, because that is what he was setting us up to do. That's what he was incentivizing and encouraging. And people were very creative with it. Some people would memorize it, some people would print it out really, really small and just bring a tiny piece of paper that they can stick in their hoodie sleeve. Some people would write on their legs. This whole class was just a class in cheating. My method, which I think I actually still have like to this day because it's one of my favorite pencils, my method was that I would take a pencil that I was planning to use for the day, and on one of those tiny envelope stickies, I would write the first two letters of the question, the last two letters of the question, the first two letters of the answer, and the last two letters of the answer. I would just write everything really, really tiny, and it was an 8-letter code that would tell me exactly what I needed to put for this test. And then I would just wrap it around a pencil so that I could fill it out while looking at all of the answers. Funny enough, one of the things that I used to do in Spanish class, apart from just drawing because I was not listening to most of his stories, was that I would study Japanese. So I actually left that Spanish class knowing more Japanese than Spanish. And it's possible that some people are going to say like, oh, you could have just read the textbook or tried and learned it yourself. But it's like, this is an entire subject that there is a teacher for a reason. Like, there is a person who is supposed to be helping me take in this information, and instead he's actively distracting us. So I gave up. He taught Spanish 1 and Spanish 2, and I think I got a B in both of his classes. He was the worst teacher I have ever had in my entire life. But that is the only time in school I have ever like actively cheated. I'm usually very anti-cheating. There were some points in college where I would take classes with friends so that we could work together on tests, quizzes, things that were more online. But I feel like that's not cheating so much as collaborating. Maybe it is. Different people are gonna have different standards, different thresholds. We had this student handbook that they would give out to all of the students so that you could write your schedule in it. I loved those handbooks. They were incredibly useful, but there was one point where my younger sister pointed out to me that the non-discrimination policy that was printed in the front of the handbook did not include sexual orientation. And again, this was a predominantly Mormon school. So if anything, that's a non-discrimination thing that needs to be there. When I started comparing it to higher education and other schools, I realized it was also lacking religion in their non-discrimination policy. At the end of the school year, I brought it up with the principal and the vice principal. They were very dismissive. And one of the things that one of them said to me was, well, do you feel like anyone is being discriminated against because of those? And I was kind of like, it doesn't matter. We need to make sure that it's clear it won't happen. He did nothing about it. The non-discrimination policy remained the same. So my senior year, I wrote letters to all of the school board members, and the next year, my younger sister's handbook was fixed. It had the extended non-discrimination policy. Just to give you an idea of the kind of high school I went to. Small town, public school. My graduating class was like 64 people. No, it was 63 because someone moved. The entire high school was about 300 students. I knew all of my graduating class. If you're going to a big school or a small town school, does this kind of thing still happen? Do you still have like really bad teachers like that? Or has it gotten better? Because it feels like the younger generation is so socially aware that they probably wouldn't stand for that, or at least they're more likely to call it out. Whereas when I was going to school, most people didn't care, didn't understand what was happening, and I was one of the few who was actually able to catch on to something that really shouldn't have been happening. That's all I have for you right now. I hope that this was like a nice little story time. This room's starting to get kind of warm, so I'm gonna go edit this video. Thank you for hanging out with me. You get 175 awesome points for making it all the way to the end of this video. That is all I have for you. Hopefully I will see you later. Goodbye. The raccoon toes are ethically sourced, by the way.